Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a moment here and then we will get started. All right, good morning. Thank you all for joining us for our Invasive Phragmites Control Fund informational webinar. My name is Kendra Jolly. I am the grants coordinator here at the Invasive Species Center. This morning, we're going to be going through the applicant guide and giving you some information and some great ways to apply for the Invasive Phragmites Control Fund grant. You'll have the opportunity at the end to ask any questions that you might have or questions throughout the presentation as Colin, our policy manager, will be speaking. If I can answer the question in the chat or in the Q&A, I will absolutely do that for you. If it's one I feel that would be beneficial for everyone to hear at the end, we will pose that to Colin when we have that time at the end. So I will ask if you can put any questions into the Q&A. It will be much easier for us to review them and get back to you that way. But yeah, thank you so much for your time this morning, and I will pass this over to Colin.
Great. Thank you very much, Kendra. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Frag Fund webinar. So today, what we're trying to do is really just reiterate and emphasize some of the key points from the applicant guidebook, which is published now, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to have a quick look at. So if you're finding today is a little bit repetitive with what you're seeing and hearing, apologies for that, but we're really trying to just use this as an opportunity, mostly just to underscore some of what we think are the key points, make sure that everyone has an opportunity to build the strongest application as possible for the Invasive Phragmites Control Fund. So for the next 30-ish minutes or so, we'll just kind of talk through, what is the Invasive Phragmites Control Fund? What are we looking for this year? How is this cycle going to be a little bit different from previous years? And how are we trying to use this as a vehicle for supporting all the amazing work that you guys are already up to on Frag? And hopefully, how can we catalyze and expedite it further? So without further ado, let's keep rolling. Um, I think you know what frag is. So, yeah, perfect. Just to kind of level set here, why are we interested in Phragmites? First of all, Phragmites has been identified as a problem from a wide range of partners and stakeholders and other folks around the province. So, this is a problem. This is a challenge. It's been called Canada's worst invasive plant, according to Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada, and call it common reed Phragmites or Phragmites or anything in between. I think it's noticeable in terms of its impact, and it's impacting Ontario in terms of, environmental aspects, cultural and socioeconomic practices, just the straight economic practices too, especially municipalities facing the sharp end of the stick in terms of Phragmites and budget implications. So whether you're focused in on the cultural aspect of our lands and waters, biodiversity centric reasons, just straight economic reasons, there's probably a good connection point on Phragmites for everyone. And we've seen some fantastic work that's been happening. This will be the fifth cycle of the Invasive Phragmites Control Fund. So we've been pleased to be able to offer that as a program for the last 4 years with our partners at Green Shovels Collaborative. So, I think we've seen such a wide range of great projects come through and really folks focusing in on different aspects of how Phragmites connects and puts pressure in terms of them and their communities. So, this is Phragmites, $3.6 billion impacts invasive species wide, and Phragmites is definitely one of the more costly and problematic invasive species. Next slide, please, Kendra. So, as I said, the Invasive Phragmites Control Fund is not a new initiative. About 5 years ago, we sat down and asked the question, like, what is the barrier to more frag work? And there is a lot of really impressive and critically important Phragmites control work that's happening all across the province and has been well before those 5 years. For more than a decade or a decade and a half, there's been fantastic work on frag and well organized and methodical and well thought out, and it's work that's kind of laid the foundation for where we are today. So just want to show appreciation for that. But about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, we were sitting down and having the conversation about like what are the barriers to more Phragmites work. And one of the key barriers that came out obviously was funding, and funding that's directed specifically for invasive Phragmites mapping, monitoring, and control work has been a barrier. And it's been the bottleneck and limiting factor of the work for a long time. There's unfortunately more frag out there, that work could be expedited if more resources came to the table. So want to show appreciation to Ontario's Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, who have helped us address this gap. And the funding for the Frag Fund since it began has been sourced originally through MNRF, and so just want to show great appreciation. And of course, there's other key funding partners that are pouring resources into addressing invasive Phragmites control fund outside of the province and outside of the invasive Phragmites control fund. So want to acknowledge their role in this as well. Other key funding sources in terms of species at risk funding that originates through the Fed and province as well are also key works, and other stewardship pots of money have really supported amazing work that you and other fraggers have done. So just wanted to show appreciation for that as well. Of course, municipalities, First Nation communities, and other funding sources to support local action as well have all been part of the solution to bring us where we are today. But with that said, the gap that we identified 5 years ago and continue to hear and acknowledge this gap exists still is a funding gap on supporting more frag work, because there are a lot of dedicated folks out there that are ready to implement solutions on Phragmites and learn from best practices and other projects and continue to treat it as an iterative process to improve. So this is a funding source for you. Um, We've made a few changes year over year. And so what you would have noticed if you've had to look through the applicant guidebook so far is in previous years, we had been capping projects at $10,000. The rationale behind that is we were trying to buy the most bang for our buck at our program budget. And although we have yet to finalize what the overall allocation pot is for this year, we are very hopeful that it will be increased beyond previous years. And so with that in mind, we're able to grow the cap a little bit, still understanding we want to buy as many great projects as we possibly can and support as many great projects as we possibly can, because there is a massive need across the province. But we were able to grow the cap, and appreciate feedback from everybody last year involved and in previous years who's been able to help us identify tweaks and changes we've been able to make this year to make this a program that's best for everyone involved in implementing it. And I want to just underscore as well, this is an iterative process, and if there's opportunities that you have identified, even so far and throughout this cycle, if you're successful or unsuccessful in funding this year, more feedback always welcome, because we just want to make sure that this program is meeting the needs, and we need that support and feedback and those ideas we want to integrate into this program. So we've been able to change the funding cap. In past years, like I say, it's been $10,000 per project. This year we were able to change the range. So we're looking for projects that start at $2,500 and go all the way up to $25,000. So a nice healthy increase in terms of the increase on the high end. And we have, you'll notice there's a little bit of loose language in there in terms of exceptional projects supported up to $50,000. And we'll speak to what is an exceptional project a little bit later, but I think the short answer for what is that, it's a multi-partner integration project. Doesn't need by any means mean that these resources are supporting multiple partners, but a project that is being done in collaboration with multiple land managers and multiple parties at the table is a really important part of what would make an exceptional project stand out. It needs to be at a landscape scale. So that means we're not looking for projects for $50,000 at that funding level that would be tied to one specific property. I understand that there are single property projects that have a budget of above $50,000. But again, we're trying to achieve the greatest impact we can across the broadest scale we can. So we're reserving those exceptional projects as defined by this terms of this policy as being projects that would work at multiple sites, have multiple partners involved in implementing those solutions, even if the resources aren't being directly flowed to those multiple partners. We're also we've also made a couple other changes. So we've provided some more guidance on priority geographies. Where the Frag Fund has always been a funding mechanism that will support any project anywhere as long as it's good fragging and it's happening in accordance with proper regulations and best management practices. That would be great, irrespective of where it is. But of course, we are able to put some other kind of requests on there. So we've identified, that's new this year, some priority geographies, which you'll see in the applicant guidebook as well. If you're not in a priority geography, no concern, you're still eligible for the frag fund, but we are trying to demonstrate the best impact we can within those priority geographies. But again, looking for projects all across the province, even if you're not in a priority geography, no problem. A really strong emphasis this year relative to previous years is we're really looking to standardize these projects as best we possibly can, and not overly regulate come down in terms of building projects, but we're always looking for mapping first because we're really trying to understand and define how much frag is there in Ontario. Where is it? And also, get these action ready. If we are able to continue to grow the frag fund year over year, and more control dollars come into play, those control projects of next year and the year after are going to hinge on really good data from this year and previous years. So if you've already done your mapping, no concerns at all. Let's progress into control with full emphasis and full force. But if you haven't done that mapping, would really encourage strong project development in terms of just trying to define the scope of the problem, doing that mapping work this year. That would be a really great core component of a frag fund app for this year. And so I just wanted to thank, I mentioned it before, but just this wouldn't, the Frag Fund wouldn't be a thing. It wouldn't be available. It wouldn't be a resource that we're really proud of and able to support lots of projects without the work that you and other collaborators have done. Last year, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, this is a process, and we're really pleased to be here. This is not the end point, but we're really pleased to be able to offer this as a continued funding program as well to support your great work. Next slide, please, Kendra. So, as I said before, this is the fifth year of the Frag Fund. Last year, thanks to the province's investment through the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, we were able to deliver a program that was, oversubscribed. So we weren't able, unfortunately, to support every project that came in. But the province made an investment of $250,000 last year for the Frag Fund, and that was the most money that the Frag Fund's been able to distribute to date. And so, what did that buy in terms of wrapping up all of these KPIs? Well, first of all, it mobilized 57 groups. So I appreciate that many of you folks are on the call today and interested in reapplying to the fund for the next cycle. So I just wanted to identify you and thank you for that great work. We were able to support municipalities, indigenous communities, conservation authorities, local green groups, just a number of kind of key implementation partners across the province. So just wanted to respect and acknowledge the great work that those specific applicants and many others were able to do. And thank you for your work there. Just a little bit of an FYI is the fund was oversubscribed more than 1.5 times last year. So $345,000 of projects we weren't able to support last year. And so that has really been a helpful number in terms of us demonstrating the obvious need for enhanced investment in this space. So I just wanted to appreciate even those that weren't able to be successfully funded last year. Just wanted to, recognize you and also just, appreciate you tuning in today, because by tuning into this webinar today, hopefully we can make those excellent projects happen. I just wanted to also shout out and show appreciation for the high leverage ratio. Ultimately, this is a really important consideration in terms of every dollar that was requested through the Invasive Phragmites Control Fund was able to be leveraged by other in-kind contributions that you're able to bring. And it doesn't need to be just cash, although that's appreciated. But if you are bringing other things to the table, we have got another session that's dedicated really about helping folks understand how to identify and in a standardized way reflect the great value of expertise. And if there's volunteer time that's a piece of your project, if there's administration time that you're bringing to your project, if there's other tools and resources from other past projects that are still adding value to this project, those are all important because ultimately we need to demonstrate leverage ratios, and that helps us as a program continue to advocate for the highest degree of resourcing we possibly can. So just wanted to acknowledge and appreciate what you guys are bringing to the table. And it was nice to see these projects. Of course, they're frag focused, but there's all kinds of other great benefits in terms of supporting this work when we bundle these projects up from the last year's frag fund. And so we're seeing great and legitimate impacts in terms of habitat restoration, critical species at risk area conservation as well, broader benefits to biodiversity and other, increased resiliency as we live within a changing climate. So just wanted to appreciate all those projects when they kind of come together and are bundled together. It really seems very impactful on a project by project basis. Of course, they're important and of course they're excellent work. But when we start to put them together into a program, it's really impressive to see the kind of collaborative results that we're achieving across all recipients and all funded projects last year. Next slide, please, Kendra. So what are we trying to do with the Frag Fund this year? Broadly, some of our objectives are to map and develop integrated collaborative plans for Phragmites. So this is kind of the strategic focus, like I mentioned before. We're really trying to answer the question, how much frag is there and what can we do in terms of multi-year plans, building multi-year plans so the groups are able to approach this in a way that moves us away collectively from random acts of frag stewardship and into really thoughtful multi-year approaches on Phragmites control. Of course, we're trying to amplify and expand Phragmites control and actual implementation on the ground at a broad geographic scale. Generally, we're also trying to address the leading edge and the rapid spread opportunities via maybe like close connectivity pathways of Phragmites. And also just wherever we possibly can, increase collaboration, increase coordination on Frag, because what we've learned is, the best Frag projects are those that integrate well multiple landowners, multiple rights holders, perspectives, everybody at the table. The broader tables we can build, the stronger and more sustainable and better resource projects tend to be. Next slide, please. In terms of some of our funding priorities this year, I've already emphasized it, but I'll go ahead and triple underscore this one. Phragmites mapping and monitoring and planning projects. If the work hasn't been done yet, this is really where we're trying to go this year. I want to just identify as well, of course, many well-established projects are looking for that kind of last funding year or the last few years of funding. And those are excellent projects. So if you've done the frag mapping, monitoring, and planning piece, kudos to you. No concern there. It's not that your frag fund application by any means would need to be scoped to that. But if you're wading into fragging on a site for the first time or organizationally, would really encourage you to think of your projects around what are we doing to lay the groundwork today? So are we mapping the whole scope of Phragmites in our area or throughout our property or throughout our properties? Are we doing that follow-up monitoring? Are we building those multi-year plans? Those would be exceptional projects. Sorry, those would be very strong projects. So I would encourage you to think about your project as to meet and connect with that number one funding priority. The next level of funding priority, of course, if that work has been done, let's go out and get rid of some invasive Phragmites. So strong control and implementation projects, following the best management practices, doing, if it's a herbicide-based project, that's okay. If it's a spading project, that is okay. Any recognized best practice, and it can absolutely encourage some elements of restoration, beyond just the actual frag control activities that are happening, but kind of longer and more sustainable, restoration vision. That is okay. It is not a restoration fund, but we totally understand and respect the fact that strong Phragmites control also requires, in some scenarios, proper restoration as well. So those restoration type costs are not ineligible. But again, we're trying to, the stated purpose of this fund is about controlling, mapping, and monitoring Phragmites. So I encourage you to think of your projects in that regard. And last but not least, of course, if we're not getting better, then we're getting worse. So any innovative type projects and approaches to Phragmites that can connect in with funding priority 1 and 2, just want to emphasize that those are on the table as well. Really the Frag Fund has been designed to achieve outcomes at scale. But if we're solely focused on outcomes at scale, it doesn't make us any better tomorrow. So if there's add-on components of projects that you're looking to implement and trying to push the barrier a little bit and trying to learn new things that would ultimately find themselves into, for example, into the best management practices next year, we need to collectively get better to achieve the outcome we want as a group. So would encourage you to think about opportunities if you're interested in adding innovative approaches within a broader project as well. Next slide, please. Eligible applicants. First Nations communities, Indigenous communities, or organizations or broader groups would very much be welcome to apply. Municipalities and conservation authorities also very much welcome to apply. Groups or organizations in Ontario that would be incorporated entities. So if you are a not-for-profit and or a registered charity, as long as you're incorporated, of course, we welcome you very much to apply. Just for clarity, you do not need to be a registered charity to apply. If you're just a good old-fashioned not-for-profit organization, you're very much eligible, of course, as well, as long as you're incorporated, as long as you have a bank account functionally. Community collaboratives as well would encourage you to think about if you are for example, a friends of type association that may not be formally incorporated, but you still want to have submit a project and implement action. That's fantastic. Would encourage you to think about identifying another partner who could functionally be the group that's submitting the application to the frag fund as a helpful workaround. So we've seen that being done quite well, where the actual implementation of a project, they would be listed as a partner, but because they're not registered and that would be a barrier to applying, would encourage you to find that other closely knit partner that may be involved in the project in some other way anyways, just to help support you and be the lead applicant in that scenario. The Frag Fund is unable to support projects that are proposed by private individuals on private land. They're not eligible for funding at this time, but I do want to give a little bit of daylight here. Projects that happen on private land that happen in partnership with projects that are happening on public land, they could be eligible. It depends, and we do encourage you to reach out on a case by case basis to help you understand and help us understand your project and if it can connect in with the frag fund. I guess an example of a project that would happen on private land in isolation that's not connected with a public element or a external partner and would thus be ineligible would be as follows. Maybe an agricultural property that has a pond that's in the back part of a pond. It's not connected to a public land. It's kind of agriculture around, bordered around the property, and there's Phragmites in that pond. That would be an example of a project that would be ruled ineligible because there's no kind of public connection point to it. It's important work. We'd love to see that Phragmites addressed, but we're just not able with limited resources to be able to support those kinds of projects. A different example that would be an eligible project for an eligible or agreeable project, I guess, under the frag fund on private land. If there's that same property, and they are adjacent to a road, and there's a municipal right of way or a ditch, let's say, that has Phragmites in it, and the municipality is doing some work on Phragmites control. But that same Phragmites stand and population also creeps onto private land and goes into, let's say, a wetland that's adjacent to the ditch. Um, that would be a project that we would have more flexibility on. And if the municipality was to apply for to the frag fund to support that work that happens, some of that work, let's say, that happens on the private land, that's a conversation we'd very much be wanting to have. So that would probably be an appropriate project for us to fund. We're gonna have conversations about who is the applicant and would they meet that eligibility criteria. But I think there's workarounds on that scenario that we'd like to happen support. So in my mind, and I think in our approach here, the municipality is doing good work. It's not a great project if the municipality is to do their good control work and not address the part of the population that's off of municipal property there. Hence why we're more flexible on the frag fund supporting that work on the private land. If that work wasn't going to happen, we won't find a solution there. The frag fund is unable to support any provincial or federal government agencies applying to the fund. So be it a provincial park or a national park, or any other kind of provincial or federal agencies. Of course, more fragging is encouraged, but unfortunately, we're not able to use these funds to support that work. And then, of course, this is provided through with generous support from the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. So this is an Ontario-focused fund. Thanks, Kendra. On to the next. So we've got a whole webinar on a budget, so I would encourage you to have a look at that. It's going to be next Monday, which is the 13th of May. So I would encourage you to register for that. But this, just so everyone's familiar, it's a very similar budget template to previous years. So we're looking for folks to think about their expenses in terms of the different categories. That's the first column there. So we've provided some examples: salary and HR, travel and accommodations, professional services, equipment supplies, communication administration, and so forth, equipment rental as well. And so would encourage you to try to think about your project in terms of its budget as falling within those categories because it helps us just administer the program and kind of bundle things up a little bit more. And then so would ask you in the next column to identify like what is the budget item that you're looking for, and feel free to lump and split. We're happy to kind of just take your however you see your project works for us, I guess. But so for instance, there we might identify like who is the project coordinator under salaries and HR, and what is it that they're kind of doing? What are the outcomes? Like what is their role in the project? Then the next column there, we're asking you to identify what are you looking for from the frag fund specifically, and then we're also looking for if there's other funding sources on each line as well in the cash and in kind. That's where you'd fill that in. So maybe in this example, fictitious example here, we've got a project coordinator. They need $500 from the frag fund to cover a little bit of additional time, but they've got some in kind and other cash, another source, the Parks Community Fund, who's chipping in some money there too. So all those numbers combined together into the total, which is the last column there, the 2,450. So would again encourage you to think this is just a quick example here. We've got a budget specific webinar. Would really encourage you to jump in and join us for that webinar next week as well. Next slide, please, Kendra. The key performance indicators. So this helps us tell the story and demonstrate the impact of the program more broadly. So would ask people to try their best to think about their projects in terms of meeting some of these deliverables. And you don't by any means, of course, need to connect in with every KPI here. That would be challenging. So I think a really strong project would look through this list and identify, okay, what is it that our project is connecting in with, and pick those out in terms of your KPIs. So what's the point of KPIs? Point of KPIs is for us to kind of bundle these numbers together and demonstrate broader impact beyond single projects. So the more that you connect in with here, the better, and the stronger opportunity. But again, there's no need at all for any project to try and figure, okay, how do we add an event just so we can meet that KPI? If your effort is not event focused, please, there's no sense in doing that. So just choose the ones that are right for your project based on what it is that you're proposing. And we do provide a description and we do provide the number. We're trying to standardize this, of course. So even though some projects might be dealing in many hectares and some projects in square meters, um would encourage you to try your best to like make sure that you're using the right scale here per these KPIs. And I know sometimes it's linear kilometers of roadside mapped or managed, and sometimes it's wetlands with hectares, and we're talking about square areas squared. So we'll just ask you to kind of try and think as best you can within the parameters of these KPIs, because again, this is how we tell the story in terms of broad scale impact of the program. Next slide, please. Key dates. First of all, you know that the Frag Fund is open because you're here today and you've been to that webpage. So we open this on the 30th of April. So we've got 30 days, a month, because it closes the end of May. May 30th is when it closes. Unfortunately, there really is a limited window for us to extend beyond this. So I think May 30th should very much be treated as the due date. We've very limited extension windows beyond that because we do need to provide notification to folks, of course, as early as we possibly can. And I just want to make the point too that I acknowledge and understand and appreciate that this is a spring cycle that was, announced the end of April. And I just wanted to identify that we're doing our best within the parameters we have to advance and nudge the future frag fund call for proposals into an earlier time frame. So I just wanted to make that point. We were able to do that with the Invasive Species Action Fund this year, and I very much hope that we'll be able to, just perhaps launch in kind of mid-winter for future funding cycles. But here we are now. May 30th is the due date. One of the points of pride, I think, of the program in the past is turning around very quick notifications. So we're hoping by basically early to mid-June, a very tight window, to have these reviewed and to have notifications be going out to successful applicants, because we totally respect that these projects are field oriented for this summer, and just wanted to give you the best information we've got available to us now in terms of our notification timelines. So very shortly after submission dates is when we would expect to be able to let people know successful or unsuccessful. Funding agreements would be executed by late June. This is similar to last year. Award notification letters would basically say your project is approved. Here's the amount it was approved for. Hopefully that's the same amount you requested. Sometimes we have to scale down a little bit based on if there's ineligible activities or a variety of reasons. And yeah, so those award letters would say you can effectively start spending on the project as you proposed it as of today. But then quickly after that, we try and pivot towards actually locking in firm agreements. So that would be happening late June. And then the final reporting period, we're proposing to be February 3rd. We have a small bit of flexibility there, not a lot, a very, very small bit. So if there are kind of February tasks or late January tasks that you think are fit into your project, whatever they might be, would just note that there may be a little bit of flexibility there at time of agreements. That's when we need to pin that down. But our request to everyone is to be reporting as late as February 3rd if we can. And then, hand in hand with that, of course, all funding and spending would need to be completed by February 3rd or by final report submission. Next slide, please. Thanks. And please, throw those questions in the Q&A. Haven't reviewed them yet, but just to encourage you at any point to log your thoughts in there. So communications, just to quickly make the point that, a really important, of course, what we're trying to do here is demonstrate work on the ground and impact of that. And an important part of that is also helping recipients tell their stories. So one of the things that we were able to do last year is support recipients in drafting news releases that were distributed to local media and help telling the story of the excellent work that proponents are doing on the ground. So it's a strategy we'd like to continue to implement this year because it demonstrates the impact on the ground at the community level. And so we're happy to work with all recipients to tell their story. And then also that would be just kind of noting. And in terms of, why are we asking for photos? It's largely because of that. It's because these are the tools that help us tell the story and ultimately demonstrate the impact of the amazing work that recipients and you are doing. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, in terms of just a few suggestions, I think, again, these are well covered in the guide, but just kind of to underscore a few key points here. Um, you know, integrated pest management is not just a nice phrase. It's something that is an absolute requirement of any project. So I would encourage you to think about your projects, just, what is the right approach based on the site conditions that you have, the various perspectives of landowners and rights holders as well around. So would really encourage any frag fund applicant to just kind of think over that question. How can we build the most integrated, most multi-pronged approach possible that is tailored always to the site? And another kind of key piece that you'll notice this year is we're really trying to emphasize that all projects that are coming in and being supported by the Frag Fund are acknowledging the existence of and relying on things like the newly updated Best Management Practices Guide. So that's the Ontario Invasive Plant Council's document, which is fantastic and continues to get updates frequently, including one that was done, I think, in February of 2024, very early 24. There's also the technical bulletin, which the Plant Council Invasive Species Center also produce. So that's a Phragmites specific technical bulletin. I think it's about 4 pages or so. Nice PDF that's available online now. And it's a great resource. It has a little bit more specific information in terms of implementing the best management practices, but it's a key resource as well. The Phragmites guidebook is a nice new resource as well. Recently updated, some new elements included in March. So it's available on the Green Shovels website. We can circulate around the link to that as well. That's a great guidebook. So if you've been a solo fragger, but you're looking about kind of figuring out how can we integrate and coordinate with other land managers in the area and start to build up a bit of a multi-partner approach here. This is a great resource that provides specific how-tos and suggestions on that. So would encourage everyone to be aware of that and review that. And then, of course, there's other great resources from outside of Ontario that are important as well. So the Great Lakes Commission, through their PAMP, Phragmites Active Management Program, is a great resource as well. So would encourage folks to be aware of and make use of those if you see as appropriate. Another key suggestion here, speaking to that guidebook idea, work with partners, aim for regional collaboration. Good projects happen at local site-based level. That's just one-off fragging. And the great projects happen at taking the lessons learned out of that and scaling it up. And that's really at this kind of nexus of where we are now. So to encourage folks to think about collaborative projects wherever you can. We are implementing a one-to-one leverage ratio for this year, and would encourage everyone to join the webinar next time to understand how we calculate that. And it is, we're implementing this in a fashion that helps people identify all the amazing contributions you're already making. And if you don't have a single dollar of cash from another funder to bring to your project, that is okay. That is not a problem, and we don't want that to be a barrier to anyone. So we want to be very clear that we have kind of standards in terms of everything else that you're bringing to the table, the volunteer time, the additional coordination, the administration time, and capacity that might not be reflected in your request to the Frag Fund, those tools that were purchased by another grant years ago and how we can value those. So we have, and a range of others. So we have a wide range of suggestions and guidance, and we're happy to work with people one-on-one basis to help them understand how can they quantify the amazing contributions that you're going to make either already. So would encourage you to reach out if you're seeing that as a barrier and you're seeing that as a hard stop. I could never get to one-to-one. Would please reach out because we want to have those conversations. We want to work with people to identify and make that not a barrier. But I also want to emphasize it is an important component of the program more broadly, is demonstrating how are we leveraging the provincial investment against other sources of contributions, be they volunteer or cash. And just to make the point as well, we don't value cash as a higher order of magnitude than in kind and vice versa. They are equally traded one-to-one. So any combination of cash or volunteer or in-kind contributions you're making to your project, we're looking for those to sum to the same amount at least that you're asking for from the Frag Fund. But more on that on the May 13th webinar. Next slide, please. So we are using a new platform. It's called Good Grants, and it's really helpful, to be honest with you. And because we are anticipating a higher volume of Frag Fund applications this year relative to previous years, this is a helpful tool that we've used so that we can get you notifications quicker. And we're asking you to work through the process. We use the same platform for the Invasive Species Action Fund, which closed just a few weeks back. And so far, the early feedback from proponents is it's good and it's helpful. And there's a few nice features of it. One, you can work in the full, you can open up an application today, save it, and then come back to it in the future, which is very, very helpful as opposed to previous iterations. And so there's a number of kind of key reasons why we think it's a good tool. No better reason than it helps us get you the answer faster. And so would encourage you to open an application at your earliest convenience. You can save it, come back to it. You can provide your login information to other key partners if there's maybe 2 or 3 folks collaborating on an app. It's kind of helpful in that way that you can work with other partners to do it. You can save it. You can come back and edit it. So just would encourage you to kind of make use of this tool as a frequent check-in if you can bookmark it. You will need to create a profile in Good Grants, which just requires an email address. So isc.grantplatform.com and can help you create an account. You do need to submit the application, which is just something we want to emphasize. We haven't run into this before, but I just would hate to have a great application built out but not hit submit. So there is a submission button once you've kind of built out and answered all the questions. Just to underscore, you do need to hit submit. So hopefully we never bump into that, but just we haven't yet. So thankfully that's because we underscored here. So May 30th is the deadline, and you do need to submit the project by then. And only applications that come in through Good Grants will be accepted. So in the past, we've used kind of Word document templates and had people submit through Jotform as well. Would just emphasize though that we're looking for people just to again help us streamline and get the word out quicker by asking people to use the Good Grants platform. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there are some frequently asked questions here, so we'll kind of quickly go through them. Some of them have been spoken to, but just helpful to have them in this way as well. Can multiple applications be submitted for different projects by the same organization Yes. No cap on the number of projects that come in. So for example, if a municipality has 5 different sites they want to do work at, no concern at all about them coming in. We encourage you to submit your strongest proposals and just make sure that they're internally coordinated. So of course, some groups work at a broad scale across the province or even nationally that might be applying to this fund. So if you could do that internal coordination piece, it helps us understand. And if we are in the position where we do need to, there's a few projects close to the funding line, just helps us make sure that those projects are coordinated and thought through. And of course not overlapping in any way if they're coordinated internally. Are letters of support required? No. We do ask for partners to be identified and we do ask for you to indicate contributions. If you have a letter of support, wouldn't say no. They're always helpful. They help us understand, but we're taking it at face value that if there's partners that are identified in here, that they are obviously have been communicated with and are aware of the project and are supporting the project as well. But we respect it's a bit of a tight timeline in terms of this and don't want to add additional pressure um, on making that submission date happen. Next slide, please. Is there a stacking limit? We mentioned this before. There is a 1-to-1 stacking limit or a matching requirement, if you like. So 1-to-1 is the request for this year. And again, we're happy to work with people to understand what is that? How do I get to that? That sounds like a lot. Can I get there? We're happy to work with people, but would encourage you very much to tune into the webinar on May 13th, which will also be recorded and distributed. So please register so you get the link, even if you can't attend day of. And we're going to walk through what is that cash? What is that in kind? How do you value that? How do you make sure that you're reflecting all of the many contributions you're making? Sometimes we see, little bits and pieces forgotten about. So want to make sure that we're capturing the full picture of everybody's submission and all the value you're adding to the project. Next slide, please. Is there any way I can get early approval? I wish, unfortunately, no. We need to wait until the May 30th closing date. We're going to consider all applications that are submitted on time at that time. And if you're successful, this is our goal. This is the value of using the online platform. This is what we strive to do, is get you that authorization letter if you're successful ASAP. And that is within a couple weeks, maybe within days. We do our absolute best and we burn the midnight oil to turn that answer around to you as fast as humanly possible. Can funding be used to train staff, like exterminator or technician licensing? Absolutely. So we're focused here on trying to support projects that deliver on the ground impact. And of course, our primary focus is this year. But if there's opportunities for you to purchase equipment, do staff training, within your group or your organization, have more people trained on specific equipment. Maybe that's herbicide applicator licensing, maybe it's something else. Yes, anything you can to build capacity. There's obviously a connection point into the work you're doing this year, but if that builds future capacity, that's a great investment that this fund is absolutely delighted to be able to make. Next slide, please. Is funding available to small scale volunteer and community frag projects? Absolutely. So this year we've got a minimum threshold of $2,500 for what the frag fund can be supporting and a maximum of 25,000. Or again, if you meet that exceptional project bar, you can go up to $50,000. Would encourage you to reach out and make sure you're in constant communication with us if you're looking at that 25 to 50K range, because it is something we really want to work with proponents on, helping identify that as an opportunity. Um, and yeah, would encourage you to kind of think of projects that are, small in scope, tied to one site. You're looking for $2,600, no problem. If you're looking for a big, collaborative, we want to map the whole county or the whole watershed approach, and you're looking for 25,000 or even $30,000, no problem. Would encourage you strongly to kind of think about the wide range there of project scope and budget. Can this fund be used to support projects that began earlier this year, or is it only to be used on new funding? So award funds can be going towards projects that are already in progress, um, but the funds can only go towards eligible expenses that are incurred after the date that you receive an authorization letter. So if you start a broad project and you're able to increase the scope of that project, and that increase of scope is what your your invasive Phragmites control fund application is about. As of the date that you receive that authorization letter, it will tell you you can start spending as of today's date on this project as you proposed. So that's where we're looking for folks. But any expense incurred previous to that authorization letter date, we can't support under the fund. You'd drawing on your original funding source or in-kind contributions up to that date. Next slide, please. Am I able to be pre-approved for next year of funding so that I can plan a project for this year? In short, no. This round of funding does not include pre-approvals. Funded projects need to be completed, as stated before, by the February 3rd date, roughly. And so, we do understand that good fragging takes years, takes time, and it takes planning. And so if you're thinking about your project now as really not even about mapping, not even about control, but about developing a plan, a thoughtful plan, that's still a great frag fund project. So I would encourage you to think about your project in that regard. That would tee you up for a frag fund app next year. Maybe that app is really about monitoring and mapping next year. And maybe the following frag fund app in 3 years' time would be about let's control the priority sites. So I'd encourage you to think about it in a staggered approach, but we can't do that kind of pre-approval for next year. Next slide, please. But maybe just one question on term. Are we able, it's a excellent question, important question. It's often asked. Are we able to support multi-year projects? At this point, no. This frag fund, a cycle has been designed to support projects this year that'll be wrapping by, let's say roughly February 3rd. We're always, happy to accept that comment as good fragging takes time and it takes a multi-year approach and we can't do one and dones. Would encourage you to think about your projects in terms of different phases. So could a frag fund application for this year focus on phase one, year one? And then for next year, it would be this functionally the same project, but it's about treatments, retreatments, and top and spot checks. And that's a phase two. That would be a strong proposal, and that would hopefully limit the amount of work, multi-year work that's going to be required. We're happy to keep taking that feedback on multi-year funding is key to good project success. And we're happy to keep, passing that information along that we can hopefully build towards a path in the future of multi-year support. But at this time, it is for this year only. So more than anything, thank you for jumping in today. Thank you for thinking about your project and submitting it to the Frag Fund. Thank you for doing your project if it's already mid-implementation. And after, so would offer you a couple resources here. First of all, if you could check out the applicant guide, that would be appreciated. It is a great resource. We've designed it hopefully to answer all these questions and hopefully some more. Would encourage you to check that out. Would also encourage people, if you're not sure if you have budget or in-kind contribution questions, would encourage you to reach out via the webinar next week. So that's going to be on Monday the 13th. Please check that webinar out. After those two things are done, would encourage you to reach out to either Kendra or Kendra can redirect you to another point of contact. Kendra is the administrator on the fund. And so all eligibility questions can run through Kendra or a designate. So I'd encourage you to reach out after that time, but do ask just so we can give the most of ourselves and our program to everybody and make sure everybody gets an opportunity. Please do have a look at the applicant guidebook, and you've tuned in today's webinar, so that's great. And then tune into the budget webinar or watch the recording first if you don't mind, and then please reach out because we're happy to help you build the strongest projects possible, but would encourage you to check out those two resources as a first line of defense. And with that in mind, just wanted to say thank you again, and hopefully Kendra can help me work through a few of these questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Colin. Looks like we do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one is a bit of a two-parter coming in from Debbie. She would like to know if we need to have confirmation of Phragmites in the area to be eligible for funding. And the second part that might be a little out of scope and maybe reach out privately is what do we do if we're aware somebody has purposefully transplanted Phragmites to their property for decorative features?
So to the first question, regrettably, there's lots of frag out there. So I would anticipate if you've got a Trans-Canada highway or any regional highway that's coming through your community, there probably is some frag. But So specifically, this fund is designed to address invasive Phragmites. There is a native subspecies. It is also, in some parts of the province, more common than it is in other parts of the province. So, for example, in Northern Ontario, but unfortunately, there's lots of Phragmites in Kenora, right on the Manitoba border, and there's lots of Phragmites in Cornwall, and there's lots of Phragmites in basically everywhere in between. So in terms of that like specific confirmation piece, I don't think you need to make that point. If your project is about let's map and inventory all of our region or all of our area to try and answer that question with more specificity, then no, that would be great. That would be a really strong proposal there. So even if you don't know or you can't validate, I guess, or verify where the frag is, and that's the question you're trying to answer with your frag fund app, that would be no concern at all. That's a great project. And what can you do in terms of approaching the decorative piece? I don't know. We try and do it too. We try and inform with more information. There's great resources out there. We've got a couple fact sheets on Phragmites that exist that might be helpful conversation starters. There's the Cormienstead Guide, which is also nice. And there's all kinds of native and at least non-invasive alternatives to give people that lovely grass look for their planters. So, but thank you for having the conversation with them because that's important.
Thank you. Our next question is coming in from Stephanie. Is there a citizen science platform for reporting sightings, such as mapping?
So very soon we're going to be able to pass out a spreadsheet that would kind of include the right attributes for any mapping project. So it would just be the very basic thing. So like, I mean, we're obviously looking for location, but we're also going to look for ask people to also just articulate like tell us a little bit about the site, not in a large way, but just is it in standing water? How dense is it roughly? Is it low density, medium density, high density? And that's really important information because ultimately, of course, the mapping point of mapping is to get to a control day, maybe next year, maybe the year after, maybe this year. But we need that kind of detailed-ish information to be able to support good control work. So in terms of mapping standardization, would encourage people to think about that. And some conservation authorities or municipalities might have in-house GIS capabilities that they might say, well, that's how we want to map and that's how we want to collect the data, and we'll provide you with the outputs as the frag fund as a deliverable, but we want to do the mapping in-house on our platforms, no problem. If you're not a conservation authority or municipality or group with a GIS technician that you can get some of their time on, there's good free applications. So there's EDMAPS, EDDMAPS, which is a great resource. So you can submit any finding of Phragmites, and you can add some kind of detailed information through that. So that would be helpful. And then the other great source as well is iNaturalist. So both of those talk to each other on the back end. Both of those share and exchange information and data between them. So submitting to iNaturalist and EdMaps, it's whatever your preference is and whatever platform you think works better for your purpose and whoever's going to be doing the mapping. But again, so we just want to work with everyone, whatever platform they're comfortable on. So if it's EdMaps, iNaturalist, if you want to do it in-house and you've got a GIS technician ready to roll, that all great, all excellent options. As long as we can have access to the data eventually, that would be a perfect project.
Excellent. Thank you. Another great question coming in from Dan. If we submit multiple applications, does the funding cap apply to each individual project or application, or is it cumulative?
Individual. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Would a provincial college qualify for this funding?
Yes. They would be an incorporated entity that would be able to apply. Other schools too would be able to as well. If there's a high school that's ready to do some fragging, all equally is eligible.
Excellent. And looks like our last question at the moment. Do we know if Canada and or Ontario are considering spraying over water like in the States? And can the funding be used to purchase replacement species when the Phragmites is removed?
Um, so there is a registered product that's available for use over water in Ontario and in Canada. So that's a newer development. I think that was 20, I have the year wrong. I think it was 2021. So it's a couple years. It's not as widely used as Phragmites herbicide application in drier environments for a variety of reasons. It's a little more specialized, it's a little more expensive, a variety of reasons. So there is a product that's eligible and available now. So that's a helpful tool. And then just replacement. So yes, yes. So that's to that restoration piece. A great Frag Fund app could include pieces of that might be purchasing native seeds. It might just be maybe there's some other restoration technique that's an appropriate best practice. Those would be eligible. I think just to be very transparent, we're trying to do with the fund is have the greatest number of resources allocated towards Phragmites control, largely reflecting the fact that there are other funding sources out there that see that are more tailored to that niche of restoration. And if we were to support restoration at scale, the Frag Fund would not be able to support a large, broad diversity of projects that are primarily frag control projects. But I don't want to minimize the value of restoration and replanting. It is eligible, but would encourage you to think about your project in terms of another funder if they could cover most of that bill, or um, uh, or just other ways. So there's a great literature. Rebecca Rooney's done some great work about what happens post treatment in terms of native plant community recovery. And to summarize very quickly, although she did a great presentation at the ISC's forum in February, which is on our YouTube channel. So if you would check that out, that would be great. But her and her grad students have focused in on what is the native plant community recovery like, and not in every occurrence, but in some occurrences, a really strong approach is let the native species, if there's an existing bank, come back. It's not always about reintroducing new seed material. In some cases, in some sites, absolutely that's required. So I would encourage you to think about those kind of pair of considerations, if you would. But restoration costs, specifically new seed and plant material, are eligible. So would please consider including them within your application. But if you can do anything to help us stretch our frag control dollars as far as we possibly can, that would be appreciated and probably the strongest proposal.
Thank you. We've had one last question come in, and likely our last question given our time today. Brian is wondering if we are able to share any past proposals as a resource or reference.
Um, No, but well, we haven't. But not that we can. So Brian, thank you for the question. I think that's going to be largely the focus of the May 13th webinar, is walking through a bit of a fictitious example of a project with the budget. So I would encourage you to check that part out. And we've changed the scope a little bit about this. So let me take that away as homework, Brian, if you don't mind, and join us for the webinar on the 13th, and we'll see how much information we can pass on. Ideally, we can write a full Frag Fund app of a fictitious example and maybe just pass that around as an example. But it'll be hard to speak to the full scope of every kind of project, be it mapping, control, but we'll do our best.
Excellent. That looks like that was our last question that we have. So thank you very much, Colin, for the very insightful and informative chat on the Invasive Phragmites Control Fund. Just a reminder for those of you that have joined us today, this webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the Invasive Species YouTube page, as will the webinar that is coming up on Monday. So if you're not able to join us, you will still have access to that webinar as well.
Sounds
All right.
great. Okay, thank you everybody for joining, and best of luck. We'll see you on the 13th.
Bye.